A T-34 crew rolling toward the German line in the winter of 1944 could not see behind them, which was probably a mercy. Clinging to the frozen engine deck were 9 men from a submachine gun company, gripping a length of rope with bare hands. The Red Army called them Tankodesantniki. Doctrine gave them 1 kilometer, the final stretch before the enemy trenches, and ordered them off before the shooting started. So why did an army that outbuilt the world in tanks never build a vehicle to carry infantry, and put them on the roof instead? Moscow, 1942. The People's Commissariat of Defense issues a new combat regulation for the infantry. Buried inside it is an instruction that had survived from the field manuals of the 1930s. Infantry will ride the tanks into the attack. There was a reason that line stayed in the book. The Red Army had no armored personnel carrier. The Soviet Union never built one during the entire war. German panzer grenadiers went into battle in armored half-tracks with steel down both sides. American factories turned out half-tracks by the tens of thousands. Soviet factories built tanks and almost nothing else on tracks. What the Red Army did have arrived by ship, through the Arctic convoys and the Persian corridor. Roughly 3,300 American scout cars, somewhere near 1,100 half-tracks, spread across an army of millions, holding a front from Leningrad to the Black Sea. When the Soviets formed their independent guards, heavy tank brigades in December of 1944, the establishment listed around 1,600 men, 65 IS-2 heavy tanks, and 19 armored personnel carriers. 19 carriers for an entire brigade. So the tank became the truck. On paper it was a stopgap. It lasted the entire war. And here is the detail that everyone missed at the time. Tank Descent had a job title, a training syllabus, and its own line on the brigade's establishment chart. A Soviet tank brigade carried a motor rifle battalion, and inside that battalion sat a dedicated tank rider company, 3 platoons strong. German intelligence charts of Soviet brigades in 1943 list it plainly, beside the rifle companies and the mortar platoon. Riders were assigned to one specific tank days before an attack, so the men knew the crew and the crew knew the men. Ropes were fixed along the hull for handholds, because there was nothing else up there to hold. The loads were fixed by class. A heavy tank took 10 to 12 men, a medium tank took 8 to 10, a light tank took 5 or 6. Now here is what the photographs never show you. The tank was bait. It is the tallest object on an open field. It announces itself for kilometers with engine noise and a column of dust. Every German anti-tank gun, every mortar observer, every machine gun team in range has already worked out where it will be and what it is worth killing. And the 9 men on the engine deck were riding the one object on that horizon every gunner wanted to hit. They rode it with nothing between their bodies and the battlefield. A burst of machine gun fire that glances harmlessly off a T-34's frontal armor will sweep that same hull clean of passengers. Shrapnel from a shell bursting overhead falls on men, not on armor. High explosive never had to penetrate anything to kill a rider. It only had to land nearby. The machine was hostile to them, too. An engine deck is the warmest surface on a winter battlefield and the worst place on earth to sit under artillery. The turret traverses without warning, and the gun barrel sweeps across the deck at head height. A man who loses his grip forward goes under the tracks of the tank that was carrying him. So the doctrine tried to hide them. Attack in a snowstorm. Attack in river mist. Attack behind smoke laid by sappers or walked in by the artillery. Anything that stopped a German gun layer from seeing a steel box with 9 men on its roof. And then get off in time. Jump too early and the platoon crosses open ground on foot. Jump too late and the riders are still gripping the rope, when the anti-tank gun finds the tank underneath them. Even the Germans blinked at it. Panzer grenadiers rode their own armor by 1944 because trucks could not keep up across country. Some panzer divisions banned the practice outright. Riders were dismounting too late and dying to fire that had been aimed at the tank they were sitting on. Which brings us to the one number that tells you what Soviet planners really thought of all this. Tank descent was prescribed only inside the final kilometer before the German line, and only for the simplest missions. 1 kilometer. Everything beyond that was meant to be walked, because nobody expected the men on the deck to live any further than that. The clock was already running. The riders just could not hear it over the engine. If you want the parts of the Eastern Front that the documentaries skip past, subscribe. New military history every week. Enter Evgeny Besonov, a Moscow-born lieutenant commanding a platoon in the 4th Tank Army. He first went into action on the Bryansk front in the summer of 1943. He rode T-34s across the Vistula and the Oder, and he was still on a deck when he was wounded in Berlin. Up to that point, the tank carried the rider. By late 1944, the relationship inverted. The Panzerfaust arrived, a steel tube, a shaped charge, 30 to 60 meters of useful range, cheap enough to hand to a 16-year-old in a Volkssturm armband. German infantry companies were soon carrying 20 of them, where they had once carried 8, and Soviet crews entering German towns learned to be afraid of alleyways. The 1st Guards Tank Army wrote the counter-doctrine. Its intelligence chief, Guards Colonel Sobolev, put it in one line. Tanks must never move out ahead of the infantry, because tanks that move ahead of the infantry become victims of the Faustniki. His report describes a brigade marching past stone mansions near Slavno. Riders on the deck saw something wrong in those buildings, searched them, and found the ambush before the ambush could fire a shot. Sobolev also ordered the riders off the tanks the moment a column entered a city, where machine guns, mortars, and bricks falling from the upper floors would kill them faster than anything in open country. Now, the part that turns the whole legend inside out. Across 160 recorded cases of damage to Soviet tanks and self-propelled guns in February of 1945, exactly 2 were caused by the Faust Patrona. When Marshal Zhukov ordered an investigation into armor losses on the Oder that March, the 8th Guards Army had lost 122 vehicles. 98 went to artillery and tanks, 15 went to mines, 7 went to Panzerfausts. So the man on the engine deck was not really there to win a duel with a boy holding a tube. He was there to be the eyes of a crew sealed inside a steel box that could barely see. Stephen Zaloga calls tank descent a wasteful and human-costly improvisation, adopted because the Red Army never solved tank and infantry cooperation. The uncomfortable part is that Moscow tried it long before anyone was desperate. On the 13th of October, 1937, near Fuentes de Ebro in Spain, Soviet BT-5 tanks carried a Spanish Republican battalion into the attack. Coordination collapsed. 16 tanks were destroyed or disabled. Moscow watched it happen, wrote it up, and kept the tactic anyway. Soviet factories eventually built armored carriers of their own. The tactic stayed. The T-55 and the T-62 came off the production line with handholds along the hull. Someone drew those handholds into the blueprint. Riding outside an armored vehicle remains forbidden by Russian doctrine. It is still done. In Afghanistan, in Chechnya, and on the roads of Ukraine, infantry climb onto the deck and hold on. Tanks got serial numbers, honorary titles, and museum floors. The T-34 has a memorial in half the cities it liberated. Men who rode on the back of it got a length of rope and 1 kilometer.